inside. She could hear the ocean a story below her deck. The swish and lap of the water was always there, even more so after the wet greeting to the day. Yet, without chords coming from the piano, everything seemed so perfectly still. She let out another slow breath and relaxed her shoulders before inhaling and filling her lungs once again. Then she blinked and looked around as if coming out of a fog. She took in the cozy rooms with the cluster of unique furniture she'd handpicked from local stores. Her home wasn't tiny, having once housed a family of 8, but it wasn't too big either. She liked having a bit of space. It was far nicer than the cramped apartment she'd rented in New York City, or the hotel rooms where she'd spent the majority of her childhood. The best thing about the house, though, was that it sat surrounded by almost an acre of land. This meant she could play in the mornings with her windows open to the sea and not worry that she'd wake her neighbors. The size of her yard was unheard of for a beachfront property in this day and age, but she'd lucked out when she'd moved here almost 3 years ago. The older lady who'd owned the property had refused to sell, even though she'd already moved into the smaller 2-bedroom next door, until she found just the right owner. Upon hearing that Roni intended to put a piano in the dining room instead of a fancy table for 12, the 80-year-old, white-haired sweetheart had held out her gnarled hands, grasping Roni's in hers. "Welcome home," Mrs. Rylander had said. Roni had grown misty at the words. Yes, it had felt like home. Turtle Island had always done that for her. It was the place where she'd once met her 2 best friends, where she'd spent every summer with them from 8 until 18. It was her home away from the hotels. She'd loved her summers here, not only because they were spent with her friends, but because it was uninterrupted time with her mother and brother. Her mother, a college professor at University of Alabama in Huntsville, had been able to take summers off, pack up her 2 kids, and spend the months at the beach. Turtle Island was also the place Roni and her friends had all promised to return to someday. And they had. Only Andy had married and moved to Boston earlier this year. And now Roni was... what? Unsettled? Bored? She shook her head. No, she was happy. She loved the island. She loved her life. She loved her house. Though, granted, she hadn't been in any one place this long since she'd been 6 years old. It was just this time of year. She always got a little melancholy in December. The sound of the little drummer boy sounded at her hip, and she looked down to where she'd laid her cell before she'd sat down at the piano. It was her brother. She'd known Danny would call today. He always did. Instead of answering, she pressed the button to send the call to voicemail, and then headed across the room as she brought up the small text window. She keyed in a short message. "I'm fine. Really. It's been 3 years. I'm over it." She ran a fingertip over the tiny Christmas village sitting on the mantel while she waited on Danny's reply. The glass pieces had been hand-blown by a local artist who rented space in the art gallery. The phone sang out the words, "and a partridge in a pear tree." She had a text. At the same time, she caught sight of the usual spot of pale yellow bobbing across her yard and heading to the house next door. The tiny body below the scarf hustled faster than Roni thought an 80-year-old probably should. She looked down at her phone. "Then answer the phone when I call." Roni smiled. She loved her brother. "I'll see you in 3 weeks. You'll see then that I'm fine." "Too long to wait. I'll call you later this week." And she suspected he would. She would talk to him then, but right now, on this day, she didn't want to have a conversation with her brother about what she'd lost in the past. It was over. She'd moved on. Instead of dwelling, she wanted to head out to the beach and get in her morning run. She wanted to wave good morning to the locals and tourists she passed, to enjoy her life, because it really was a good one. And she wanted to head over to the hotel and meet up with her friends for lunch while they giggled and fantasized over the idea of what they could all do with the 24 amazingly hot men that would soon be parading all over the island. Because it wasn't every